The sound of hope fading away always carries a distinct echo, the hollow resonance of lost battles and worlds erased from the stars. That was exactly what could be heard echoing through the halls of the Confederation, humiliating defeats and mass exterminations. Entire planets consumed by an alien force that showed no mercy, while the fleets meant to protect the galaxy disintegrated under the shadow of an enemy that never hesitated. But how do you survive against something that turns the dead into weapons? How do you fight against creatures that know no mercy but master fear as a weapon? The Confederation had no answers, only a collection of failures. Each confrontation with the Xinarc, as they had come to be called, brought more bodies and less hope. So, the arrival of a new species to bolster our forces seemed, at best, a grim joke. Humans, that was their name, entered the galactic scene with promises of support. More fodder for the slaughter, some said. After all, what could such a young civilization offer in a war so cruel? Fleets to be burned? Soldiers to delay the inevitable? The answer came during the Siege of Bastion, an industrial world essential for supplying the Confederation's forces. The 18th Legion, already decimated by prior conflicts, was ordered to defend the colony at all costs, knowing full well that defeat was inevitable. But this time, there was a twist: the presence of a human unit called the Third Vanguard, led by an enigmatic commander whose reputation in Earth's unification wars was still a mystery to most. When the Xinarc arrived, bringing their monstrous bioforms, organic tanks, and clouds of chemical terror, the Third Vanguard's response was unexpected. They didn't fight like any other Confederation army. Their tactics were bold, unpredictable. And for the first time, the Xinarc hesitated. This wasn't just a battle. It was the beginning of something greater, something even the Xinarc could not foresee. The humans were willing to do what no one else would. And the universe was about to change. They came like a tidal wave of living destruction, relentless and indifferent to the concept of limits. Their biological war machines crushed every attempt at resistance, while their ships rained merciless fire upon us. It didn't matter who the target was: soldiers, civilians, entire cities, everything was fuel for their insatiable appetite for carnage. Their deformed creatures advanced, wielding weapons made from their own bodies. Sharp spines, living blades, and chemical projectiles launched without hesitation. Each new assault was a spectacle of horror, yet we resisted. It was that or extinction. With 20 million lives depending on the defensive line, we threw everything we had at them: energy shields, plasma cannons, and trenches prepared for the inevitable. At 7:12 a.m., the defenses were activated. By 8:23 a.m., the first breaches appeared. By 9:01 a.m., the perimeter was completely compromised. That's when I broke every rule. I personally commanded the evacuation of the spaceport and requested help from the human forces stationed nearby. My superior refused, insisting it was better to die with honor than ask for aid. There was no time for debate. I shot him and sent out the distress call. The response came in less than a minute: reinforcements en route. Prepare for impact. When I looked to the sky, I saw something I hadn't expected. They weren't meteors but landing pods cutting through the atmosphere with blazing trails. They fell like arrows, bringing something that seemed insignificant compared to the enemy's vastness. There were so few of them, almost minuscule in number, but they carried something we hadn't felt in a long time: hope. They descended with a ferocity that defied all logic. They didn't just come to fight, they came to inspire us, to reignite the spirit of resistance. No matter how few they were, they gave us something that seemed lost: the courage to believe there was still something worth fighting for. If you're intrigued by the fate of the Confederation and the awe-inspiring human warriors, why not share your thoughts with us? What do you think will happen next in this epic battle? Leave a comment below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel to follow the unfolding of this thrilling story. Your opinion could be the key to the next great discussion. The last shred of dignity we had was simple: hold the line long enough for the humans to arrive. With our forces depleted and the perimeter in shambles, I reorganized what was left and managed to stabilize the defenses at 12 breach points. That's when the human commander made his request, coordinates for something he called the terminal point. I hesitated, confused. "What is that?" I asked. "Trust me," he replied with a dark laugh. "You just need to hold until impact." He seemed like a man destined to die, yet there was something unshakable about the firmness in his voice. With no other choice, I shared the coordinates. "Prepare yourselves," he said with an almost insane calm, "and clear the area for impact. They're on their way." The Xinarc intensified their assault as if they could sense something coming. At one of the largest breach points, the perimeter gave way. A multi-legged biomechanical tank broke through the barriers, loaded with enemy soldiers and organic armor. Its weapons fired plasma and flames, reducing defenders and structures to ashes. I fought with everything I had, pistol in hand, alongside allies firing desperately at the monstrosity. Our ammunition ran out. Our morale was in ruins. And then, I heard a sound that seemed to cut through my very soul. It was something beyond what any living creature could produce, a roar that mixed fury and glory into a single, resonating wave. Before I could react, something descended from the sky like an incarnate lightning bolt. The impact was devastating. The tank, once unstoppable, was torn in half in an instant. Fluids, parts, and fire erupted in all directions as a shockwave threw me to the ground. As the dust began to settle, I got to my knees and looked at what had come down. There were only 5 of them, imposing figures clad in gleaming black armor that reflected the light as if forged in the depths of the abyss. Their presence was overwhelming. Their height and the battle scars adorning their armor gave them an almost divine aura, as if they weren't warriors but entities from another world. The figure at the front activated a hologram over his shoulder, a quadrupedal reptilian creature with flaming wings and blazing eyes, hovering above a raging storm. It was a symbol of power I didn't fully understand, but at that moment, it didn't matter. They were with us. And for the first time in that battle, the Xinarc hesitated. The warriors who had descended from the heavens seemed like characters from a forgotten myth. The leader's armor bore intricate details, a helmet sculpted in the shape of a reptilian creature with outstretched wings, as if torn from a nightmare. The lenses of his eyes glowed like embers beneath the creature's jaw, and his deep orange cape fluttered in the wind as if it had a life of its own. The visual impact was undeniable. Though the cape might seem absurd in retrospect, in that moment, it gave him a mythical aura. It was as if they had stepped out of a child's storybook, legendary heroes emerging to annihilate monsters from beyond the stars. But what truly set them apart wasn't the details of their armor or even the cape. It was the weapons they carried. Each warrior wielded weapons that seemed forged for mass destruction. The leader carried 2 long blades, one in each hand, glowing with a faint bluish energy that pulsed as if alive. Beside him stood another squad member, adorned with an insignia of a storm and a golden gorget, holding an alien bow that looked capable of firing pure energy. Behind them, a giant among the warriors bore a colossal hammer, its intricately patterned head resonating with power every time it moved. Engraved on his armor was the image of a titanic pillar surrounded by lightning. His sheer presence was suffocating. The two remaining warriors were equally striking. One, with armor marked by depictions of fangs and claws, looked like a demon incarnate. A necklace of teeth hung around his neck, and he wielded a blade designed to tear through enemies with brutal precision. The last warrior, more understated but no less deadly, carried a long, intricately detailed rifle. His armor was decorated with the symbol of a blue tree amidst a storm, a figure of serenity amidst chaos. For a moment, the battlefield fell silent. Then, the leader raised his voice, broadcasting on an open channel. "The laws of honor compel me to offer you a chance to surrender. Retreat, or face annihilation. The choice is yours." The message was clear but absurd. He was addressing the Xinarc, offering a chance to withdraw to a species that knew only destruction and assimilation. It was an invitation to the impossible. The silence was broken in the most brutal way. The Xinarc, unsurprisingly, responded with a storm of firepower. The confrontation was about to begin, and I had the distinct feeling that fate had shifted in that exact moment. The true battle began as the silence shattered under a storm of gunfire and explosions. For an instant, the Xinarc hesitated, as if evaluating the 5 humans who stood unyielding amid the flames and wreckage. Then, the same commanding voice as before echoed, laden with an almost theatrical authority. "We will take this as your greeting. But now, it ends." And with that, the storm of high-velocity projectiles began. Metallic slugs, charged with devastating kinetic energy, sliced through the battlefield like invisible blades. I had seen iron projectiles fired by tanks and cruisers before, but never by infantry soldiers. The humans' fire reduced the Xinarc to shredded flesh in a brutal, efficient spectacle. As the enemies fell, the impossible continued. After decimating dozens of Xinarc warforms, the humans advanced into melee combat. A suicidal move? It seemed so. But it quickly became clear that these warriors were not ordinary soldiers, they were something more. At that moment, I understood the true meaning of devoted. The humans, though not physically superior to most Confederation species, had something rare, absolute determination and a deep connection to something that transcended the material. Their technology was integrated with an unparalleled mental force, a psychic power that amplified their abilities and made them lethal on any battlefield. One of the warriors, the leader clad in reptilian armor, demonstrated this overwhelming power. Using anti-gravity systems integrated into his armor, he moved with a mobility that seemed magical, flying over enemies. Each strike of his blades cut through flesh and metal as if they were nothing. Projectiles seemed to veer away from him, deflected by an almost invisible energy field, while he dismantled tanks and bioforms with the precision of a surgeon and the force of a tempest. Amidst the chaos, I saw something I would never forget: lights emanating from the humans' hands, flames that needed no fuel, bursts that turned enemies to ash. They weren't just soldiers. They were living manifestations of power and war. In that instant, it became clear, these 5 weren't there to survive. They were there to win, no matter the cost. The battle became a spectacle beyond anything we could have imagined. The humans fired high-velocity projectiles, moving like specters between enemy lines. Their weapons of absurd precision turned the Xinarc bioforms into fragments of flesh and metal, but it was in close combat that their true ferocity was revealed. They weren't just warriors, they were living symbols of relentless destruction. Among them was a leader adorned with armor marked by an emblem of a lion engulfed in flames. He tore through tanks as if they were toys and faced the Xinarc's highest commanders with a skill that seemed almost supernatural. Beside him was another fighter, covered in symbols of predatory wolves, moving with calculated cruelty, striking vulnerable points as though he could sense the enemy's fear. These 5 humans held a critical breach while the Confederation forces watched in disbelief. Soon, we discovered there were 95 more like them, spread across the battlefield, each team a perfect machine of war. It was like watching legends come to life. They seemed to know where enemy fire would come from before it was fired, and they fought with a synchrony that appeared almost telepathic. The lion-emblemed warrior, leading the charge, accumulated so many victories that, upon returning to the evacuation point, he was covered in blood, oil, and radiation scars. His armor had to be forcibly removed by engineers, yet he smiled, almost laughed. They all carried themselves with unwavering pride, as though challenging the impossible was their norm. Aboard the human cruiser, Banner of Fury, I witnessed the reverence these warriors commanded. Ordinary soldiers saluted them as if they were something beyond human, living symbols of a greater power. I asked a human commander, Roldan Volter, about their origins. "These are the Primarchs," he replied with notable reverence. "Super soldiers molded by perfection and necessity. They fight in groups of 5, inspired by ancient stories from our species where legendary hunters formed groups called tyrannies." The leader, known as Kale Vyrn, smiled upon hearing this. "Where our shadows fall," he said, "the enemy disappears." In that moment, it became clear to me, humans were not just survivors. They were living legends, forged in the fires of war. The sound. It was the harbinger of their arrival before we could even comprehend what was happening. It resembled a storm, but it was so much more, the noise of nearly 100 human warriors cutting through the sky like apocalyptic rain. A grim warning that chaos was about to descend. The battle itself was not won, at least not in the traditional sense. Despite their ferocity, the humans didn't have the resources for a prolonged engagement. But for the first time in years, the massacre shifted in our favor. Xinarc casualties outnumbered our own. A symbolic victory, perhaps, but still a milestone. As the Confederation forces retreated from the planet, I caught sight of the human fleet. Their ships were immense, colossal to the point of making our largest dreadnoughts look like toys. A single human cruiser unleashed energy barrages with such precision and power that it obliterated targets miles away in an instant. When they began orbital bombardment, the planet below was reduced to a glassy surface, denying the Xinarc any chance of using the remnants as biological material for their horrors. For a fleeting moment, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: hope. But alongside it came a crushing realization. We cannot win this war without them. Humans, in their brutality and ingenuity, are masters of conflict. They have fought amongst themselves for millennia, perfecting their craft of war to the limits of imagination. Their technology surpasses ours in every dimension. But more than that, they possess something we lost in our struggle for survival: a moral code. They fell from the sky not because they needed to, but because they believed it was the right thing to do. Their actions were driven by principles we had long considered outdated: honor, duty, justice. They sacrificed lives and ships, not for strategic gain, but for conviction. As I watched the human survivors aboard the Legacy of the Forge, I heard stories of armored battalions capable of conquering entire continents, of weapons psychically bonded to their wielders, of soldiers capable of facing the impossible and emerging victorious. They were the key to this war. And now, only one inescapable truth remained: we must unite with them and fight like never before, or the darkness of the Xinarc will consume everything. They were a living war engine, forged in chaos and tempered by conflict. There was no hesitation in their actions, only the hunger for justice against monsters so abominable that diplomacy was a cruel joke. The humans had found their purpose in this war, and for the first time in decades, the Xinarc hesitated. Their advanced lines fragmented, their attacks collapsed into defensive tactics, and their structures, once aimed solely at destruction, began forming into fortresses on occupied worlds. But this retreat was not a sign of weakness, it was the prelude to something greater. Ominous stations emerged from the depths of space, terrifying monuments that seemed like final weapons, prepared to extinguish all hope. "Senators," I declared, my voice echoing through the grand chamber. "We cannot hesitate now. This is our only chance. For the first time, we've stolen the Xinarc's momentum. It's time to strike back with everything we have." The reserves were called up. Factories across the sector worked day and night. The Confederation opened its arsenals like never before, handing every weapon, every resource, every shred of knowledge about the enemy to the humans. Because deep down, we all knew, only they could turn this moment into victory. In the weeks that followed, the galaxy united like never before. Armies were reorganized under new leadership, and two names emerged as the commanders of the final offensive: Kaler Draconis, leading the Western Line, and his companion, Kasha Valthera, taking command of the Northern Front. Together, they devised what would be known as the Stormwing maneuver, a bold plan to encircle the Xinarc in their own territory. When the attack began, it was like witnessing the birth of a legend. The human fleet, bolstered by the Confederation's best technologies, advanced as an unstoppable force. Orbital bombardment split the skies, reducing Xinarc fortresses to ash. On the ground, the Primarchs became the heart of the offensive, destroying colossal bioforms and cutting through enemy lines with surgical precision. The turning point came when Kaler Draconis personally led an assault on the Xinarc's largest station. A colossal structure radiating power, protected by a monstrous fleet. While his troops faced the impossible, he and his team infiltrated the station, confronting horrors beyond imagination. Every step was marked by loss, but also by determination. In the final moment, when all seemed lost, Kasha Valthera, commanding the Northern Line, ordered a synchronized fleet attack, creating an opening for Kaler to reach the station's core. A massive explosion of energy consumed the structure, extinguishing the Xinarc's last hope of recovery. The war was over. But not without cost. Of the Primarchs who began the battle, few returned. Gravely wounded, Kaler and Kasha were hailed as heroes, but the true legacy was greater than them. It was the improbable union between humanity and the Confederation, an alliance forged in blood and hope, that finally brought peace. As the dust settled over the glassed battlefields, one truth became clear: the monsters were defeated not by weapons but by the determination of an ideal. Thank you for joining us on this journey of suspense, action, and sacrifice. But now, we ask you, what would you do when faced with an enemy as relentless as the Xinarc? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more epic stories like this one. Because, in the end, every legend begins with those who dare to fight.